The people double down on it. And so all you're doing is confirming their suspicions. Problem I have with the government and the COVID thing. The problem is you're not truthful enough because you're trying to obtain behavior rather than tell people the truth so behavior emerges. And so they're pandering. Now, nothing you say is trustworthy. So everything just spirals. Just say the fucking truth. It's the answer to goddamn everything. Just say the freaking truth. 90% of the time, it's we don't know. The safe bet is this. Tell the truth and then go both sides if you have to. This is what we know the pessimistic take is, the positive take is. In that case, the government's going to take the cautious position of saying X. Okay. That's it. We have the first principles of the universe. We have first principles of every single stage that you can claim. We can, with logic, test every dimension possible that's available to humans. This means that truth is the satisfaction of demand for infallibility, and all truth is performative. There are no undecidable propositions left. We can test any proposition for whether it's testifiable. In other words, whether it's performative truth. Anything that isn't performative that you claim is true can't be. So you can engage in critique. You can engage in false promise. You can do that with pill pull. So they do it with pill pull, which they justify as, well, we're looking at it from every angle in order to bring consensus and compromise. Right. That isn't the same thing as truth. Compromise will favor the female position of redistribution undermining, but truth favors the male position of truth before face regardless of cost, which forces you to adapt. Well, social construction, the argument is everything is socially constructed. Well, that's not true. Everything may be socially distributed, but social construction means that it's fabricated. Truth is socially distributed. You discover truth and you distribute it. You manufacture deceit by social construction. There's no other way to make deceit except by social construction. The fact that the Greeks got it wrong and that math proof was a proof of anything other than it wasn't false. So that's what a proof means. It means it's not false. Does it mean it's true? Well, we never freaking know until we've applied it. So people think that a math proof is a truth. No, it's that I can truly claim that this is possible. So I'm trying to correct thousands of years of fairly systemic problems. And we've corrected those problems in the physical sciences, but you and I don't have too much invested in the physical sciences. The minute we get into behavioral sciences, especially the social, political, economic, or group strategic things, all of a sudden you're affecting our opportunities. You're not increasing our opportunities by knowledge of the physical world. You're perhaps limiting our opportunities by taking away from all of us, regardless of stripe, our means of getting away with shit. You're making us realize that what we say is our truth is our negotiating position. It's not true. It's just your negotiating position. And I'm saying, okay, everybody's basically uttering what they think is their truth as a negotiating position. And I'm just providing the science to say, okay, how do you weigh that out on a scale and decide whether that is true, false, reciprocal, irreciprocal, good or bad, moral, immoral, etc. Everything I try comes back with the same answer. Okay, you're trying to steal this way. Because that's always the answer, is that they're trying to steal. And they don't know they're trying to steal. And they don't know that they're saying something is true because they want it to be true, because that's their negotiating position on behalf of their instincts, which is on behalf of their genetics.
Truthiness, a truth, my truth, and their truth. That will be the truthiness. It's not related to the truth, the singular truth.
Instead of attacking people on their truth, what I say is, so if your truth means it works for you without causing you problems, then it's true enough for the problem you have. But it doesn't scale to true enough for interpersonal, intersocial, interpolitical, international. It doesn't scale. So what we mean by truth is decidability sufficient for the context of the question, such that one is free of blame or harm. Truth original's meaning is really obvious because it means, in Indo-European, it means your words as strong as an oak, meaning your testimony can be counted on as not varying from reality, or even more so, your testimony is worth using so that the rest of us don't come to harm. If you operationalize this word, instead of use it as a vague analogy, in other words, if you understand the meaning of the thing across the
Literally.
scale, then you can understand what you're saying. So I tend to say, well, it's true for me. You mean it's true enough for you? Her truth, it's true enough for her. And what that really means is I need a way of acting in this world despite my ability, inability, knowledge, lack of knowledge, capacity, lack of capacity. I need a way of acting, and this seems to work for me. This is the set of criteria, decidability, that seems to provide ends for me and let me avoid harms. In that sense, your truth, you're true enough is fine, but it's only at that level it's true. It's not true beyond that level. So if you say, I need to act as if this is true because it's beneficial to me, that's fine. But it's not the same thing of it is in fact true, which means it's decidable across people. What scale are we talking about? And so that's how I address truth in the system, which is preferential truth, which is what I'm talking about. And then testimonial truth, in other words, something I can testify to. There's surviving truth, which is what I can testify to has survived in the market. That's really the test of it. Something has survived, because truth at all these levels is really an evolutionary problem. That would be scientific applied truth. There would be ideal truth, which is if we knew everything there was to know and we weren't ignorant or unable. Then there's logical truth, which is really tautology, and there's tautology itself. But there's no ideal truth. Tautology is just that. Logical truth isn't true like in the sense we mean it, like it's a proof. It's a proof of possibility, given the constraints that we established. And tautological truth, it just means A equals A. That doesn't mean anything. It's a completely circular argument. To say it's true, it just means it's identical. This is why I emphasize the work of decidability, is that truth is that which I can testify to that's sufficient for decidability to be insulated from fault or blame in the context. And so once you operationalize truth, it becomes a relatively simple thing to understand. But we're humans. We use rules of thumb. We communicate by clicks and grunts and hms and ha's if we can get away with it. We have a whole bunch of words for agreement. Truth is another word for agreement. We use it lackadaisically. My favorite examples are, what's the difference between faith and belief? Well, I have faith in this, I have belief in this. Well, I mean, I'm not really sure. And trust. So faith, belief, and trust. How do you disambiguate those terms? Well, I can trust is the operational decision. Belief is the philosophical tradition, and faith is the theological tradition. The big problem people have is, because the thing we're having to rearrange in minds is the truth problem. It's like we spent a couple thousand years trying to figure out what's true. And it turns out that what we're really doing is discovering what's false. If you survive the tests of falsehood, you have a truth candidate. What's truth? Truth is simply a property of reciprocity. It's the only reason to cooperate is under truth. When I started out, truth was a hard sell, because I didn't start out with truth, right? I just said, how am I going to prevent all this crime? And then I had to solve truth. And that's what really got me on all this catastrophe of, holy shit, the lying's everywhere. Your civilization's correspondence with that truth, with the truth, obviously determines its rate of evolutionary computation. So civilizational rates of advancement, rates of evolution, are determined by how close they mirror the laws of the universe. So my favorite part of philosophy is the true-false dichotomy. Actually, no, it's undecidable, possibly true, and false, but false is the greatest certainty. That's ternary logic. False is the highest certainty. Undecidable, possibly true, and false. Why is true possible? Because the problem is, until we discover the first principle of any domain, then all knowledge is open to incremental increase. Even systems of knowledge are open to incremental increase, or domains of knowledge. But false is the only thing we know for certain. So this is what you get into with mathiness. The laws of logical inference are false because right, they're only telling you about inference, not about truth. So a statement is inferable, but that doesn't mean it's true. Right? The premises. But we, in computer science and databases, we distinguish between undecidable, null, unknown, no, and true and false. And we understand that false is more meaningful than true because false is decidable and truth is not. So that's why falsificationary logic is so important, is because we can be certain something is false by our inability to construct it from first principles. But we can never really know if something is true because the context application of the general rule, right? That's what a general rule is. It's a search criteria for application, but the context determines the application. So until we get into an individual context, we don't have enough information to be able to decide which general rules apply and not. So truth is almost always open to reformation. So therefore, when we say something's true, we're saying that it's warrantable as satisfying the demand for liability. It's warrantable in liability in the context. Everything we're doing is along the spectrum, not this binary true false nonsense.
I point to the sophistry which is currently prevalent, which is the science is settled. It's like damnable is what it is.
Here's how I ask you people. If you think that's true, will you bet your house and life on it or your children on it? Then you can't claim it's true. What you can say is you prefer to take that risk. Truth is a claim of innocence. When I say truth is a claim of innocence, that makes it a real thing rather than an ideal thing. So now if you say, I'm claiming this is true, I'm claiming I'm innocent, you're innocent of warrant of liability. Can you claim you're innocent if you haven't done due diligence? No. Can we give you a recipe for how to conduct due diligence across the spectrum that would make sure that you could claim that you had done at least due diligence enough to claim that you're innocent of not performing due diligence? So a claim, a promise of innocence, where you have done sufficient due diligence to make it such that you are not liable for harm to others by providing information that is harmful to the decision-making process, which is what we call the informational commons. So that's all it means. That's all it can mean in context. The ideal truth is something we would know if we had all the perfect information. And there are cases where we can know that because we have video evidence that we've eliminated all other possibilities. But it's not because it's confirming the action, it's because the actions we observe falsify the alternatives. That's falsificationary. In other words, all logic is falsificationary. Justification is just a cheap way of explaining information to people so that they can perform their own falsification, which is what we do when we talk to each other. We give each other sentences that are sufficiently unambiguous that I have falsified all alternatives to what you mean. What's deceit? It's continuous recursive disambiguation by sentences that let you assume that you have understood what I've meant, but what I've really done is perform suggestion and therefore introduced you to deception. I've misled you. That's why falsification is so necessary, is because truth isn't achieved by meaning, it's achieved by falsification. Once we've established meaning, which is an episodic example that provides decidability, then you get to falsify it, which is what you and I do when we go, I don't understand, or that's not right, or how can that be? Or, but what if this happened? These are our attempts at falsification. So all communication is cheap communication and expensive falsification. And the reason what P-law does is so wordy is because it provides the falsificationary description, not the justificationary. So I can, with my warranty, I can demonstrate I've done due diligence in the construction of this, therefore I can warranty that I haven't lied to you.
So what you're saying is one needs a method of speaking to people within their socially constructed frame of approval, which is their approved frame, paradigm grant.
Right. So you're what we're doing is attempting to resonate with that which they must agree with.
Of course, the way this works is one-on-one, because once you have their frame, you can work within it. But it's almost impossible to do across frames in groups, which is what truth does. It allows you to work in groups. But in social construction, you have to find a person's frame and work within it. In other words, In the abstract, their grammar is intentionally incommensurable by design, whereas the purpose of truth is one single, most parsimonious paradigm that's universally commensurable and therefore universally applicable. I mean, if you look at it as math, it's just set theory, right? They're just closing off the set. But in our terms, that's the big problem, is that people in truth gravitate towards the truthful answer. And so their spectrum of communication can be universal. The problem is that when you do that, you fragment. So you get conservative to libertarian. The left's thing does the opposite. They allow all these crazy frames without truth. The only thing is approval, which allows them to pursue the same political end despite their differences in comprehension and understanding. So essentially, they sacrifice everything in order to get to the herd strategy. We sacrifice self-delusion in order to get to the truth, but it comes at the cost of making us fragment. This is a very profound understanding of the differences in why the political tree forms. Now, we think of it as RK selection, which is the left herd and the right packs, and left universalism and right tribalism. We think of it in those terms, but what you're saying is the grammars we use, in other words, the grammar consisting of paradigm law, we each use different paradigms and grammars to advance our ideas. So the difference is that the conservative right masculine allows different tribes to pursue coherent ends, whereas the herd causes different frames to pursue the same end. In other words, they sacrifice reason and we don't. In order to do that, they have to use social construction and we have to use truth. I suppose that's probably a novelty people haven't thought about before. But that sounds like something, I bet the guys who are in the social constructionists, the Gans's people, it's hard to believe that they wouldn't have thought of that already. They just justify it. In other words, my solution would be get everybody on the truth, right? But then compromise. Their solution is play the enemy's game, which is create a warfare of social construction. When the answer is, of course, is that once you can't communicate because the other people are in denial, or they're in a religion, or they're in an ideology or a philosophy. Not all philosophies are forms of denial, but most things are truth evasion, not truth production, because truth requires adaptation. And the philosophies, ideologies, and theologies, they don't require adaptation. Matter of fact, their whole purpose is to prevent adaptation or to organize people rather than adapt to the truth. So the problem you get into is that a lot of tribes can coordinate using the truth. Armies can coordinate using truth, but you can't do that. You can't coordinate with people who are lying unless you're willing to sacrifice the truth. So that means you have to be a bottom feeder in order to cooperate, or a liar. And we have to be the middle or the top feeders, right, in order to make this work. This is a natural consequence of competition between different demographic distributions of, genetics. I mean, if you keep the political triangle in your head, or the trifunctional triangle in your head, it just explains the masculine right edge of the triangle and the feminine left point of the triangle.
And I think everybody needs to read Keegan. And one of the most salient points he makes, that the one thing that you notice is that their standard of truth telling is far above the population. And the population can't tolerate it. This is because military epistemology is the least forgiving. Because if you prevaricate or soften rather than seek the ultimate dangerous, most painful truth, people will die. Right? And so military epistemology, well, if you look at how people fight in this world, their functionality in battle is equivalent to their ability to tell truth to one another.
Say, say no more about Middle Eastern armies.
I mean, exactly.
I did not say that, so cut that out.
So you can now organize people with truth toward an end, which will cause them to, some of them to adapt and some of them to resist. Or you can organize people to a fiction, a fictionalism, a theology, a philosophy, and ideology. You can get people to organize that way by creating social constructions. And I disambiguate social construction when I say social construction is a falsehood and truth distribution is something else, right? That's just distribution of the truth. But you have to socially construct a falsehood where you just distribute a truth.
Right.
Social construction is something that is like propaganda. People say propaganda is just information. No, propaganda is deception. Social construction is deception. The difference is that the only reason we need some truth is because it requires adaptation. In other words, it's because we have some reason not to believe it. So there's a resistance to marketing truth. Falsehood spreads faster. Truth usually requires us to pay a cost. But falsehoods and deceits and false promises and social constructions tell us that we can get a freebie. And most of the time, it's by not adapting. And the difference is that it's desirable.
That's right.
Because every lie gives you a discount and every truth creates a cost. It creates a neurological cost, it creates an emotional cost, it creates a psychological cost, it creates a social cost. Now, when people think that there's scientific truth, but that's actually a product. They confuse the truth of a description with the truth of a judgment. And when you're talking about like the physical sciences, we get an opportunity out of the sciences, even if it's abstract, the ability to produce transistors because we understand quantum mechanics. On the other hand, when you get to behavioral, now you're telling me I've got to adapt. I got to pay a cost. People, they'd rather have a comforting falsehood that provides them a discount on adaptation in order to maintain a steady state of non-adaptation than they would in order to pay the cost of producing an intertemporal good. People don't want to save, they want to spend. They don't want to capitalize, they want to consume.
This goes to my study on what happened to America. When I'm studying the things that are forbidden, I'm like, it's the opposite of what is within that window. That's an Overton window or something like that. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna do it anyway, just because I'm disagreeable and I'm irritable.
I do it because it's the only way to know the truth. In the via positiva, you don't learn anything. If somebody agrees with you, you haven't learned anything. The new knowledge comes from falsification. You have to find means of disagreement. Truth is difficult because of that. I can tell you a comforting lie and you'll get it the first time I recite it. And you'll take that puzzle piece, just like you were saying earlier, and you'll apply that puzzle piece wherever you can, like a cookie stamp.
Right.
You don't really understand it. It just satisfies you. Right. Whereas if you have to discourse, make the argument, you have to actually understand what you're saying. And so that's the problem, is truth is expensive. And because of that, distributes slowly. And lies or frauds is better the answer. Frauds are cheap and distribute quickly. Same thing we find in news. Bad news distributes because it makes you feel good about yourself, like you're superior. Good news distributes less so because you're giving away status to someone else. It's a peculiarity to have an intellectual bias toward truth regardless of cost. Because most people are saying, what's the cost necessary to optimally get along? They're not saying, what's the cost to optimally not err? Truth is expensive, but it's like a tax. If you don't pay your taxes, you can't create commons that provide discounts for all. Well, sorry, truthfulness is a high cost. That's why only Europeans produced it. There's falsifiability and implausibility. People talk about those two, but they don't talk about criminality. They don't talk about, I'm going to make it falsifiable, I'm going to make it implausible, and I'm going to make it criminal. This is why I say that the Greeks invented this wonderful thing called reason, but it takes place on a stage at which we don't accuse each other of malincentives. And this is the problem with Victorian philosophy as well. When we get on stage, when Europeans get on stage, we shake out our hands, we show that we're not armed, and we don't engage in anything that would lead back to arms. Of course, the left does. They violate the Western tradition of leading us to arms by engaging in GSSRM and ad hominem, which you're not able to do when you get on the stage and negotiate. In other words, you come to parley at parliament. You put your arms away. That includes your verbal arms. You are limited to truth and reciprocity, or at least your understanding and reciprocity.
And so the problem is we domesticated debate by removing a truth the way we domesticated war by removing a truth. So we've created these things that we take for granted in our metaphysics at an argumentative level. I'm just putting it back. People said, well, what you did to libertarianism was just put violence back in, right, as an option. I'm like, yeah, because that's what the world exists of. And I said, well, what are you doing here? I'm just putting lying back in. If you make a claim, which any assertion is a truth claim, you're asserting that it's true. And if it's true, what you mean is it's a claim of innocence. The difference between philosophy and law is in philosophy, you err or not. It's true or not. In law, you err or not. And if you err, you better not have any motive. So essentially, P law changes truth to a claim of innocence. So we're creating law. And so what you get to say is, given my due diligence, I believe this to be true, but I'm not claiming it's true. And I'm submitting it to the jury for falsification.
Consideration, right.
If you say it's true and you can't testify to it,
Yes.
and it violates parsimony, violates falsification, violates implausibility, and violates criminality or malincentive, then what you've done is you've committed a crime. If you instead say, I have these incentives and I'm willing to say that I have them, but as far as I can tell, this is true, that's a different thing.
Yes.
Right? You're not saying it's true. But if you get up and make an argument, that's great. Worse, this is where it all comes in. And you've heard me say this a number of times. If you claim a deduction from that premise, now you're expanding the lie. The problem is, the minute you lie in European civilization, you're breaking the oath, which is to not lie, steal, or run in battle. So the minute you do that, you're now outside the law. You're an outlaw. In other words, now I can kill you. We have a really long record of promoting this idea of truth for that reason. This gentlemanly domestication we've added to our discourse creates incentive for fraud.
It appears to stem from the failure of the Western tradition of dueling.
Yeah, we should have never stopped it.